There's a cold the Carpathians hold in their soil, a kind of deep chill that isn't about temperature. You feel it in your ribs, in your breath, in the way pine needles crackle underfoot like brittle bones. We arrived in the first week of October. The valley was remote, even by Romanian standards. No cell signal, no power lines, no trail markers past a certain ridge. Just green-black forest stretching endlessly in every direction, and a blanket of morning mist so thick it felt like you could chew it. We were 5 wildlife researchers specializing in wolf behavior, predators at the top of the natural food chain. This project was supposed to be a routine observation. 6 weeks cataloging wolf pack dynamics, tracking patterns, recording interactions. We were funded, prepped, and eager to work. Our base camp was a cluster of 2-person tents strung around a central fire pit. Supplies were cached in weather-sealed crates. Laptops and gear protected beneath reinforced plastic canopies. We'd done this before. We'd done this in harsher environments, in more dangerous regions. None of us were new to the job. That's why the unease set in slow, like altitude sickness. You don't notice the thinning air at first. Locals from the village down the mountain had warned us about the valley. Not with words, exactly, but with the way they reacted when we mentioned the region. A man at the fuel station went pale when he saw the map in my hand. A shopkeeper crossed herself subtly when she heard the name of the forest. They weren't superstitious people, not outwardly, but their silence had weight. They didn't speak of the valley. They didn't speak of the wolves. And they certainly didn't speak of the children. We had pieced that part together ourselves from old clippings and dusty police logs tucked in the back rooms of a library whose doors hadn't been opened in years. A few scattered reports, mostly vague, about missing miners, all for villages that bordered the valley's perimeter. Nothing ever confirmed. No bodies found. No open investigations. Just whispers buried under bureaucracy. We didn't come for that, though. We came for the wolves. And the wolves were active. The first week was productive. We located 2 active dens within a mile of camp. Using motion-triggered cameras, we tracked feeding patterns and territory shifts. We tagged a few stragglers with non-invasive trackers, and even managed to observe a kill from a concealed vantage point near the riverbend. There was a primal elegance to it all. Brutal, sure, but unfiltered, like watching nature in high definition. But even then, something felt off. The wolves were wrong. Not sick, not malnourished, but something in their movements, their silence. Packs this size didn't usually move without vocalizing. Howls, yips, low growls, but ours barely made a sound. They communicated in glances. They hunted with precision, and they never looked up, not once, even when they passed near camp, even when they circled our tents. They watched the trees, not us. The nights grew longer, and with them came the unease. Small things, easy to dismiss at first. A cold spot near the northern perimeter. A motion camera that caught only static. A trail of prints, bare human feet, appearing in the morning frost alongside wolf tracks. We joked about it. Had to. Humor keeps your hands from shaking. It was the 3rd week when I saw it. I was stationed alone that night, tucked into a blind weed constructed from fallen branches and canvas netting. Just outside the valley's western edge, a slope opened up into a clearing where the wolves often passed through on their nocturnal runs. I had the thermal scope set up and calibrated, scanning the tree line in slow arcs, logging temperatures, and tagging pack formations. It was monotonous work, hypnotic even, until the shapes broke pattern. There were 6 wolves in the lead, 3 flankers, 1 at the rear. But something trailed behind them, low to the ground, not quite crawling, not quite walking. It moved like it didn't belong to its own body, limbs jerking in strange, asymmetrical rhythms. At first, I assumed it was an injured animal, maybe a fox or a young boar. But the shape was wrong, elongated, and too human. I zoomed in. It moved on all 4s, but its arms were too long, too thin. The back curved upward like a question mark, its spine visible beneath pale, dirt-streaked skin. The head twitched with each step, sniffing the air, following the wolves like a stray satellite caught in orbit. I told myself it had to be a child, maybe one of the missing, maybe feral, abandoned long ago. It made a sick kind of sense. Raised by wolves, forgotten by man, a tragic echo of some real-life Mowgli. Then it stopped, as if it knew I was watching, and it looked at me, directly into the scope. Through the lens, I saw eyes that didn't reflect fear or pain, but something older, something deeper. The infrared flared red where its gaze met mine, glowing like coals. That's not how thermal optics work. Mammals reflect heat, but not like that. Not like predators. Not like they're staring back. I blinked and it was gone, vanished into the tree line without a sound. The wolves continued on, unaffected. I didn't sleep that night. Back at camp, I scrubbed the footage frame by frame. The figure didn't appear again. The software flagged the shape as non-classifiable biological entity. That happened sometimes, glitches, misreads, but the data was clean. The thermal output was real. I didn't show the team. Not yet. I couldn't explain it. Couldn't name it. And I've learned in these forests, names have power. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't a child. It wasn't human. And it'd seen me. That was the beginning of the end. We just didn't know it yet. It happened on a night so still, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. We weren't looking for him. We had gone out to tag a lone wolf that had broken from the pack. Unusual behavior that drew enough curiosity to send us deeper into the valley than we normally ventured. Our boots cut silent paths through moss-laden trails, thermal scopes humming softly in our hands, the moon barely touching the ground through the mesh of pine canopy overhead. It was Martin who saw him first. A sharp gasp, a signal with his hand, then sudden, frozen stillness. We followed his gaze. Just beyond a fallen log, in a shallow depression of earth partially hidden by brambles, was a form. Small, curled, breathing. At first, it didn't register. Dirt had caked the skin to a gray, bark-like tone. Ribs pushed against flesh like blades. And the limbs looked too long, too starved to be alive. The only clothing was a strip of fur around the hips, matted and torn, hanging by what looked like sinew. The boy didn't flinch as we approached. He didn't even blink, just stared. His eyes, sunken, too large for his face, had a clarity that made something inside me twist. There was intelligence there, but not the kind shaped by human society. Something colder, ancient. The wolves were with him. They didn't growl, didn't bare teeth or circle protectively. They sat in a loose half-moon around the boy, silent and still, as if waiting, watching. When we approached with caution, nets and tranquilizers ready, they parted. Not fleeing, just dispersing. As if their task was done, the dart hit the boy's thigh. Nostraged. His body trembled once, then crumpled like dry leaves. The forest remained silent, even as we lifted his limp form onto the stretcher. One of the wolves followed us for several paces before vanishing into the tree line. Back at camp, he was laid out on a cot inside one of the tents. Blankets did little against the deep cold in his limbs. He barely breathed. We examined him carefully. No visible wounds, no tattoos, no documents, nothing to suggest who he was or where he had come from. No missing child alerts matched his age or description. He looked 10, maybe, but his body was malnourished to the point where age became an abstract. His teeth, once we dared examine them, were unlike anything we'd seen, sharp, triangular, more animal than human. Meant for tearing, not chewing. Attempts to communicate failed. He ignored Romanian. Didn't respond to English, German, or Hungarian. He didn't speak at all. Until the second night. We were gathered around the campfire, the boy still unconscious in his cot. Snow had begun to drift in from the east, quieting the world in a soft, white hush. Tension clung to us like damp clothing. The sight of him, of those eyes, had unsettled something in all of us. We didn't admit it aloud, but we knew. He didn't come from any world we understood. Around midnight, a sound stirred from the tent. Not a moan, not a cry. A whisper, a voice not shaped by exhaustion or pain, but by purpose. Steady, measured. We crowded at the entrance, uncertain whether to enter, uncertain if we even wanted to hear what he was saying. None of us understood the language at first. It didn't sound familiar. Not Slavic, not Latin-based. But Johann, our linguist, froze mid-step, head tilted like he was parsing out a forgotten dream. Later, he would explain that the boy had spoken Latin. And not the church Latin that lingers in hymns and scripture, but something older, something harsher, closer to what was carved into the stones of forgotten catacombs. The phrase, once translated, became a stain none of us could scrub out of our thoughts. You dream because I allow it. He hadn't opened his eyes, hadn't moved since being brought in, but we all heard it, clearly, as though he whispered it not into the air, but into our bones. That night, sleep came quickly, too quickly, like falling down a well. And then the dreams began. I remember mine vividly. I stood in the clearing where we had first found him, but it was no longer night. The sky was amber, thick with ash. The trees bled sap that hissed when it touched snow. In the center of the clearing stood the boy, back straight, eyes black and endless. He didn't move, didn't blink, but I knew, somehow, that he had summoned me, that the forest itself bent inward around him. The wolves circled silently. Their eyes glowed not with instinct, but with something far worse, recognition. I tried to speak. I couldn't, my mouth filled with dirt. I tasted roots and rot. When I awoke, I was on the opposite side of the tent. My sleeping bag had been unzipped and re-zipped around me in reverse. My boots were on the wrong feet. I hadn't moved myself. I couldn't have. Every one of us had a similar tale. Martin woke in a different tent entirely. Sophia's camera, which she always kept under her pillow, was found perched on the boy's cot. Johann had scratches down his back, 3 neat, parallel lines like claws, but no pain. No blood, just marks. None of us spoke of it that morning. We avoided each other's eyes, pretending we were too tired for coffee, too cold to talk. But we all saw it. The boy was awake, and he was smiling. Not a grin, not joy, just a bare, knowing upturn of the mouth that suggested understanding of something we didn't yet grasp. He hadn't moved from his cot, but his position had changed. He now lay perfectly centered on the thin mattress, hands folded across his chest, like a corpse waiting to be buried. The blanket covered him to the chin, too neatly. We didn't put him like that. None of us had entered the tent, or at least, none of us remembered doing so. That day, the forest felt smaller, denser. The trees leaned in a little more. The birds were gone, and the wolves didn't come back. By the 3rd day, the boy had still not eaten. We offered everything: warm broth, canned beans, dehydrated fruit, protein bars. Even water was ignored. He sat cross-legged on the cot, still as stone, his head tilted slightly downward as though listening to a voice beneath the earth. Each time we placed food in front of him, his eyes flicked toward it briefly, and then returned to that unseen focal point. The air inside the tent was thick, sour with old sweat, and something metallic, something deeper than rot. We tried warming the tent, changing the light source, playing soft music. Johann read aloud from a Latin primer, hoping something might rouse a memory or trigger a response. Nothing worked. His body should have shut down. He should have collapsed. But he didn't. And then Martin cut himself. It happened in the middle of food prep. We had stopped bothering to cook for the boy by then, focusing instead on maintaining our own strength. Martin had been carving strips of wild game. A small deer we'd found freshly killed near the river, oddly untouched by predators, when the blade slipped. A deep gash bloomed across his palm, dark red spilling onto the cutting board, seeping into the raw meat. The boy looked up. It wasn't a glance. It was sudden, sharp, like a switch had been flipped behind his eyes. He inhaled, nostrils flaring subtly. We all saw it. He didn't blink. And then movement, smooth and deliberate. He stood from the cot and walked slowly, barefoot, toward the table where Martin still clutched his hand, stunned and dripping. No one stopped him. The boy reached the table, picked up one of the bloodied meat slices, and brought it to his lips. He didn't chew. He didn't savor. He swallowed, fast and quiet, like a starving dog that's learned to eat in silence. Another piece followed, then another. His hands trembled, not from weakness but anticipation, reverence. He devoured every strip soaked in blood, leaving behind the clean, untainted portions like husks. Afterward, he returned to his cot and lay back down, mouth stained red, eyes fluttering closed as if the act had completed a sacred ritual. None of us spoke. We barely moved. The rules had changed, and we weren't sure when it had happened. That night, the dreams returned, but different now. More vivid, more detailed. Mine began in the forest again, but this time I was underground, crawling through a tunnel lined with fur and wet leaves. The smell of iron was overwhelming. I could hear something breathing ahead of me, a rasping, animal cadence, slow and patient. When I finally emerged, the boy stood on a stone altar in a clearing I didn't recognize, surrounded by wolves. His eyes bled. His mouth was open, but instead of sound, darkness poured from it, coiling tendrils of black that curled around my throat. When I woke, the inside of my mouth tasted like rust. Across camp, the others were worse. Johann had soaked his sleeping bag in sweat. Sophia had bitten through her lip in her sleep. And Martin was nowhere to be found. We found him near the tree lean, barefoot, clothes soaked from the morning frost, muttering in Latin under his breath. When we called to him, he didn't respond. His eyes were rolled slightly back, lips twitching with every syllable. We had to carry him back to camp. Later, he claimed no memory of it. It was then that we began to suspect something chemical. Environmental poisoning, perhaps. Mold spores or trace elements in the water supply. We ran tests, checked filters, inspected food stores. Everything came back clean, but we were deteriorating. Rapidly, supplies started to vanish. Small things at first, a syringe, antiseptic, a roll of gauze. Then entire kits. The first aid station had been stripped clean one morning, its contents gone without a trace. We accused one another, searched each tent, but nothing turned up. The boy, now fully mobile, had stopped feigning weakness. He walked the camp at night. We didn't see him do it, but we'd wake to find objects moved. Coals in the fire pit disturbed. The GPS unit relocated to a different tent. And his restraints gone. We had lashed him to the cot that first night after the dreams began. Soft bindings. Nothing cruel. But now, every morning, he lay unbound, arms folded neatly, cot undisturbed. Johann swore he had tied them himself the night before. And still, no one saw him move. We started rotating night shifts, though none of us trusted sleep anymore. But exhaustion always won. No matter who stayed up, we all woke to the same report. Sleep had taken us, just for a moment. Long enough for the boy to move freely again. The final straw came with the footage. We reviewed the thermal recordings from our perimeter cameras, desperate for a clue. Most of it was uneventful, just the usual scan of forest heat signatures, the occasional flicker of static from a weather disruption. But then at exactly 2:03 a.m., every single feed glitched. Not one camera malfunctioned. All 5, simultaneously, dropped to black for 60 seconds. When the feeds returned, the image on screen was the same for each. The boy, standing inches from the lens, staring directly into it. His eyes flared red in the infrared, impossibly bright. He didn't blink. He didn't move. And then, slowly, he raised one finger to his lips. A gesture, not of fear or threat, but of possession. He knew. He had always known. He wasn't part of this forest. He was the forest. The dirt. The cold. The silence. And he had let us in. Now, he had no intention of letting us leave. I stopped sleeping entirely after the 4th dream. Even with the fire blazing and caffeine in my blood like battery acid, the edges of things blurred. Reality frayed at the seams. I couldn't tell what day it was. My hands trembled constantly, and I began forgetting words in conversation, simple things. The names of trees, the faces of the others. I stared at Sophia for nearly a minute before I remembered who she was. My own name fell foreign on my tongue. The boy hadn't spoken again, not aloud. But the whispering continued, not just in the dreams. Now it followed us through camp, curling around our tents at night, threading between trees in the early hours. The language had shape. It carved itself into our thoughts like roots splitting stone. Johann had taken to muttering constantly under his breath, Latin phrases we couldn't translate. He stopped responding to questions altogether. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed devout. It was 2 days after the footage incident that I found the journal. I had wandered behind camp, chasing something I thought I'd seen, a flicker of movement, maybe an animal. My boots sank deep into soft earth, and I tripped on a root that felt deliberate. The fall cracked a rotten patch of ground wide open. Beneath it, buried under centuries of moss and bones that it didn't want to identify, was a box. Wooden, bound in iron, stained black with age and weather. The latch opened too easily. Inside was parchment, brittle, charred at the corners. A journal, written in looping script that danced between Latin and a rough, ancient Romanian. The ink had faded, but not completely. The first entry was dated 1760. It told of a monk, Benedict, I think, stationed at a now-vanished monastery further down the valley. He described a boy found in the forest during a lunar eclipse, surrounded by wolves who neither fled nor attacked. The locals called him Lunaniscut Moonborn. He spoke little, but when he did, the wolves listened. Benedict was fascinated. At first, then the villagers began to forget. Names, dates, children, then eventually themselves. The boy was still, always watching, eating only meat soaked in fresh blood. He whispered at night, and the dreams began. By the third week, only the monk remained. His final entries were desperate scratches, words repeated in frenzy. He eats memory first, then soul. He is not of man, nor wolf, but walks between. A shape learned from watching. The mouth is not his, but borrowed. I read those words in the cold light of morning and realized they were the same phrases Johann had begun to whisper. Word for word. That afternoon, Johann vanished. No warning. No noise. No straged. Just his clothes, folded neatly beside the fire pit. Boots aligned perfectly. His belt had been snapped clean through, frayed at one end as if chewed. The journal lay beside them, open to the final page, where someone had drawn a crude image in charcoal, an elongated figure with black eyes and a mouth full of knives. Sophia vomited when she saw it. Martin paced in circles, muttering that it wasn't possible for a person to disappear without leaving prints. But the ground was smooth, untouched, no drag marks, no blood. That night, the wolves returned. They didn't enter the camp. They never did. But we saw them, just beyond the firelight, lined up like sentries, watching, breathing slow. We counted 12 pairs of eyes, then 15, then more. I stared into the dark until my vision shook. One of the wolves stepped forward, a large, gray-furred alpha with a notch in its ear. Its gait was wrong, too rhythmic. Its legs moved like they were remembering how. It stood on its hind legs, briefly, long enough for the firelight to catch its face. Johann's face, slack-jawed, eyes empty, skin stretched taut over a snout that wasn't there. It dropped to all fours and vanished into the trees. I didn't tell the others what I saw. I didn't need to. I think they knew. We no longer questioned the boy's nature. The term feral felt laughable now. He wasn't a lost child raised by animals. He was something that had learned how to wear the idea of one. A mimicry, a mold pressed into flesh. Not born of wolves, but worshipped by them. Drawn from deeper soil, older blood. The wolves didn't raise him. They followed him. And now we did too, whether we wanted to or not. By the time we decided to leave, the forest had already closed around us. The camp was no longer a sanctuary. The tents flapped without wind. Our firewood refused to burn. Every device we carried, radios, sat phones, even analog compasses, flickered and died within a span of hours. Martin tore apart one of the tents in a fury, screaming into a dead walkie as if rage alone could force a signal through the silence. There were only 3 of us left now, Martin, Sophia, and myself. We packed what we could. Rations, journals, what little gear still functioned. The boy sat motionless near the fire pit, eyes closed, fingers curled in his lap as though meditating. We didn't dare approach him. Our GPS units, fully charged the night before, powered on just long enough to display the route back down the mountain. It was clear. We followed it, winding east along the narrow game trails we had hiked weeks ago. The landmarks seemed familiar at first. Then the trees began to change. Shift. The path split, then split again. A fork that hadn't been there. A river that now flowed uphill. We walked for hours, but the canopy never thinned. The terrain never sloped downward. Eventually, the GPS pinged a waypoint. We checked the screen. It said we had arrived back at camp. The same ruined tents, The same burnout fire. The boy was still sitting where we had left him. He hadn't moved. Sophia began crying. She couldn't remember how many days it had been since we last slept. Martin claimed it had only been one. I was no longer sure either of them were right. We tried again. Different direction. Same result. No matter which way we turned, we returned to the center. The trees refused to let us pass. At some point, I looked up and saw the sun rising behind the ridgeline. And then, slowly it began to reverse. It moved backward, minute by minute, setting again where it had just risen. The light bent as it passed through the trees, like watching time fracture through water. My shadow stretched long, then snapped back into place like a rubber band. None of us spoke of it. That night, Sophia did something I will never forget. She stood at the edge of the clearing and removed her coat. The wolves had returned, more than before, a silent sea of yellow eyes beyond the light. She walked to the tree barefoot, her breath fogging the air. Her hands trembled, but her spine remained straight. She moved slowly, reverently. I knew what she was doing. She was offering herself. A bargain. A peace offering to whatever this thing was, this thing that sang in our minds and rewrote our dreams. The boy opened his eyes as she stepped beyond the edge of the clearing. And then he began to sing. It wasn't music. There was no melody, no rhythm. Just a low, pulsing chant that vibrated in the bones more than the ears. It rose and fell like the breath of something immense. Something buried. The wolves joined in, not howling, chanting, their voices layered with his, creating a sound so ancient it bypassed thought entirely. I felt in my spine, my teeth, the hollows of my lungs. Martin fell to his knees, clutching his head. I could see his lips moving, mouthing names. His own, I think. Maybe ours. But they kept slipping from his grasp like smoke. I reached for mine too. My name, my mother's, the names of my childhood friends. All of them slid away, soft and smooth, like pebbles in stream. I was forgetting. Not just facts or words. Myself. We found Martin's body the next morning. Or what was left of it. There were no wounds. Just emptiness. He was lying on his side like a child, eyes open, mouth slack. A faint smile curled at the edge of his lips. His skin was pale, and his eyes had no color, as if something had emptied him out from the inside. The boy hadn't moved. I don't remember building the fire that night. I don't remember what I ate, or if I did, but I remember the boy sitting beside me. He stroked my hair with small, careful fingers, the way a parent might soothe a feverish child. My head rested on his lap, though I don't recall moving there. His skin was cold. His breath smelled like pine and copper. I thought I was dreaming, but I didn't dare close my eyes, because I knew what he had said. Not aloud, but somewhere deep, threaded through every part of me. I dreamed because he allowed it. The words no longer sounded foreign. They felt like mine. It was only when I began writing in the journal again, this one, the last one, that I realized it had changed. My pen moved across the page with ease, but the characters weren't English. They weren't Romanian either. They were Latin. I could read every word, understand every syllable, and I knew then, as surely as I know my own breathing, that this was never a study, never an expedition. It was a summoning. We had come to observe the wolves, but the wolves had come for him. He hadn't lured them. He had created them. This is my last entry. My hands are not my own anymore. He sits beside me now, humming that hollow song. His fingers are tangled in my hair. I don't know my name. I don't know where I was born. I don't know how long I've been here. But I remember the final phrase carved into the monk's journal. And I understand it now. If you find this, don't bring him down the mountain. He's waiting for the world to find him. In a journal,